So we have to get into it a little bit about the ego. What is the ego? We have to understand what this is. The ego is it's our personality. It's the way our mind understands ourselves. Oftentimes, it's an inaccurate understanding. Most for the most part, it's inaccurate because it's looking for ways to identify ourselves with. So this is going to be a, a, a grouping of both nature and nurture. So that's going to create our personality. We have to note that those two components alone don't leave us free with much free will. We can't come to terms and justify free will while being pre-programmed by those two components alone. So that I like to think there's a third component because otherwise it doesn't add up. Any semblance of free will can't be justified. So how do we identify ourselves? How does our mind come to identify ourselves? We use anything that we relate to. We use our occupation. We use our nationality. Let's start with the occupation. The occupation can change. It often does. If your identity is tied to your occupation and you lose your job or you change career paths, you come to find that you were not who you thought you were. Well, that's true. You were not who you thought you were if you thought you were your occupation. Similarly with your nationality. I was happened to be born in America. That's happenstance. That's nothing to do with my substance or my makeup. That's where I was born. When we identify with our nationality, we often negate other people, and it causes division. So I don't think that's a good way to go about things either. So we have to be careful with what we're identifying with. Our mind wants to identify. It's going to use our memories and our experiences to reinforce a personality. Don't hold on too strongly to that because you can lose. Most people have lost themselves in that. I did. And I'm trying to snap out of that. But when you come to challenge somebody's sense of self, you come to challenge how they identify, they're going to respond with a lot of aggression and they're going to become very defensive. And it's not them. They're not being mean. They're not being a jerk. The reason this is happening is because the ego wants to survive and it lives in the mind. It needs to justify itself and it needs to live. So that person becomes defensive. That's a mechanism. That's the ego trying to thrive. So don't blame them. Understand that it's very hard for a person to come to identify with who they really are. It takes a lot of practice. How we get there, hopefully we're going to get into that as well. But before we go there, I would tell you from my personal experience, before I even came to understand these thoughts, I always had a hard time identifying. I used to have like very long blonde hair and I was a musician. So people were like, I was very identifiable. I looked very, I was noticeable. And I came to realize that, and it didn't sit well with me. I didn't want to be a thing or a genre or anything of the sort. So I came to, I cut my hair off and I started dressing as bland as I could to not represent anything. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but that was speaking to these ideas of not wanting to identify with any outer or flimsy circumstance. I needed to identify with something stronger and deeper, something of substance. Similarly, I wouldn't wear any like logos or graphics on my t-shirts or my clothes. Something about it just didn't sit well with me. I felt like I didn't want to be in NASCAR. I still can't get a tattoo because I wouldn't want to take a stance. My opinions 10 years ago are not what they are today. And I can almost promise you that in 10 years from now, my opinions will not be what they are right now. So we don't want to identify and depend entirely on our own mind. And I'm going to sum up with this. If we come to understand, and we have to humble ourselves to do this, if we are looking for a truth inside or outside in the external world, we have to humble ourselves enough to recognize that our perceptions are subjective. They are based on our experiences and our memories, and they are ours alone. That cannot possibly identify a truth. It can't, because it's subjective. So it takes a little bit of humility and a lot of patience and some practices, but we could identify truth using another method. And we're going to get into that next time.